Oh, there we go. Now it says recording. There we go. Okay.
Okay. So I'm here with Scott Ritter, and we are here to discuss his latest analysis that has drawn a bit of controversy from other analysts and commentators. I was very honored and thankful for Scott to agree to come on this platform and just kind of talk about his perspective of the controversy and of the detractors that are questioning his analysis and imputing his motives and things like that. But again, I want to do very little bit of talking, as little talking as possible, and I want to listen to Scott try and explain from his perspective his thoughts about this the controversy and people disagreeing with his most recent analysis. So Scott, thank you again for coming on. Let me just let you go ahead and discuss. About a week ago, your analysis drew some ire. So, what are your thoughts on the people that are disagreeing with you and things like that? Can you kind of encapsulate the whole controversy in your own words?
Sure. I mean, first of all, let me start by saying that I take none of this personally. So my thoughts of the people who are saying things, I don't care. I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way, but I don't take it personally. We're all on a journey, I hope, to ascertain fact-based truth about what's going on in Iraq, or not Iraq, about Ukraine. When people introduce me, they call me a former Marine Corps intelligence officer. I'd like to emphasize the first word off the front. It's former. That means that I'm not somebody who can pick up the phone and call Putin, call Biden, call Miley, call Shoigu, call the commanders on the ground, call the National Reconnaissance Office and order up a satellite to be moved, call NSA to get some SIGINT hints on some things. That's what I used to do for a living. I don't do that for a living anymore. I am a prisoner of the data, the same data that's available to everybody. So the question isn't, am I making something up? Am I doing something? I'm using the same data that you guys use. But here's the difference. And it doesn't mean that I'm better or worse. It's just the difference. Because now we come to the rest of the title, Marine Corps Intelligence Officer. We'll start with Marine Corps. That means I do combat. I do war. What I did, it was my profession. Now, I don't know the people that are impugning me, attacking me, questioning me, whatever. But unless they have a resume that says, we did big arrow combined arms warfare in the 1980s and 1990s when the United States was the cutting edge of this technology, this doctrine, this methodology, then we're really not the same people. We're not the same people. Means I come at the problem from a different perspective than maybe they do. Doesn't mean I'm right, just means I come at the problem from a different perspective, a combat-oriented perspective derived from not 20 years of counterinsurgency warfare in Afghanistan and Iraq, but actually the big game against the Soviet Union, in Europe, tanks, maneuver warfare, combined arms. That's that. And then we say intelligence officer. That means I'm a professional. I'm not an amateur. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a wannabe. I'm not a LARP. I'm not doing airsoft. I was a professional. I did this for a living. I did this during wartime. My analysis saved lives. I mean, I'm not here to brag, but I have a letter of commendation from a general, 2-star general, that says the analysis I gave the Commandant of the Marine Corps altered Marine Corps courses of action during the Gulf War and saved thousands of lives. I'm pretty proud of that one. I'm also proud of being the guy that stood up to Schwarzkopf about my analysis about Scuds and how they were being used. I was right. I'm more famously known for standing up about weapons of mass destruction. I was right. I did some stuff in the Soviet Union where I took on the Defense Intelligence Agency. I was right. What I'm trying to get at is I have a pretty good track record of being right. And most of the time when I was right, a lot of people thought I was wrong. And a lot of people fought me very hard. Some fought me professionally, some took it personally and attacked me. But it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, I think my resume in my experience as a professional intelligence officer, is pretty damn good. And it means that I come at the problem from a perspective of how an intelligence professional collects information, assesses information, evaluates the information, and comes up with certain conclusions. So I'm not making it up as I go along. I'm not, spur of the moment kind of guy. Now, one of the things in the intelligence profession is that it's a constantly evolving situation. So when we start, we have a collection plan based upon essential elements of information, et cetera. And we collect information based upon certain questions that we put out there. Then we bring the information in, we evaluate it, we process it, we disseminate it, and then we get feedback. That feedback comes from our consumers, it comes from whatever we're collecting on, and then we reconfigure our collection plan to do it all over again. So if you're an intelligence professional, you don't simply come up with one analysis on one day and call it quits and say, I'm sticking that to that analysis no matter what. Because newsflash, the world doesn't work that way. The world evolves. And when you're dealing with something like a war between Russia and Ukraine, it evolves on an hourly, on a daily, on a weekly basis. So you must constantly be going out there and gathering new information and doing that whole collection cycle, the intelligence cycle, all over again. When I think I got a little bit of notoriety at the beginning of this by going against the grain that Ukraine was winning the war. I came out and I said, no, my take is that Russia is winning the war, that Russia is accomplishing its tasks, that Russia is inflicting more damage on the Ukrainians than they are on the Russians. And then when the phase one, because when this war started, we didn't know there was a phase two. No one can sit here and say, I knew phase two was coming. It was phase one because that's all we got. We saw the Russians advancing on Ukraine with multiple axes. And we're all trying to put that into perspective. Why is Russia doing this? Why would Russia go in with 200,000 men, attack a force that has 600,000 men, flipping the 3-to-1 odds that you need to guarantee success in battle? Why would they do this? What is their purpose? Well, we got an insight when Russia said, phase one is over, phase two is beginning. And I said, okay, now this makes sense because Russia was applying maneuver warfare concepts, feints, diversions, fixing, etc., to prepare the battlefield to accomplish their primary objective of defeating the Ukrainians in the Donbass region, which is a stated objective of Vladimir Putin and the Russian high command. But we also know that they wanted to do some other things. Again, I'm not making this up. This is what the Russians said. They said their objectives were denazification and demilitarization. They also said that this was part and parcel of a strategic objective of making Ukraine neutral, meaning not a member of NATO, and shaping events in Europe so that NATO would accept a new European security framework that took into account Russian national security considerations. Again, I'm not stating this. This is what the Russians said. Now, anybody who studies war should hopefully have read Clausewitz. It's sort of like 101. And right from the start, we're taught war is an extension of politics by other means. What does that mean? It means that it ain't about winning the battle. It's not even necessarily about winning the campaign. It's about achieving the political objectives. That's called strategic victory. When the Russians started this special military operation, it's a special military operation for a reason. That has a specific legal term. It's not a war. War implies mobilization and bringing to bear everything you got to achieve your objectives. The special military operation is limited by the legal framework for which Russia justified this conflict, and that is collective preemptive self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. That means that Russia can use that military force necessary to eliminate the imminent threat posed by Ukraine's military to the collective security encompassing Russia and Lugansk and Donetsk. Russia could shape the battlefield in a manner which made it more likely that they would prevail. That was phase one. But phase two is about accomplishing the stated task of liberating the Donbass, of creating a land bridge that connects Crimea with Russia, and expanding Crimea so you secure water resources for Crimea. Russia's achieving this. It's masterful. Anybody that says it's not doesn't know what they're talking about. It's a stunning military victory that I believe will be studied for some time now. Not too many people understand what the truth is on the ground there. The Russians are going up against a defensive line that is as developed and fortified as any that's existed in the history of modern war. We're talking about interlocking defenses, concrete reinforced bunkers, trenches, artillery with pre-registered fires. The whole works is there, and the Russians are dismantling it piece by piece by piece. And they're maximizing enemy casualties, minimizing their own. Good. Now, the interview that has caused problems with people is an interview I believe I gave to Garland Nixon, together with Ray McGovern. And this is right after the United States did two things. One, Lend-Lease. The president signed into effect a Lend-Lease law. And to give you a brief history of that, Lend-Lease dates back to 1941, March, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt unleashed the arsenal of democracy in support of Great Britain, later the Soviet Union, and China, so that they could build up their military capabilities sufficient to defeat Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. It's a big ticket item. It's a big deal. And Congress breathed new life into this legislation and gave it to the president, which means that the United States is now in business of activating the arsenal of democracy in support of Ukraine against Russia. Anybody who doesn't understand that this is a fundamental game changer doesn't understand what I just said. Now we're going to put some numbers to this. Prior to this special military operation taking place, the United States was providing between 100, 200, 300 million dollars of military aid to Ukraine per year. This was a mix of non-lethal aid, trucks, things of that nature, and lethal aid, javelin missiles primarily, and things of that nature, counter battery radars. And we viewed that as a lot of money. Hell, a president got impeached over it. I mean, big deal, lots of money. Okay, now I'll give you another number. Russia in 2021 spent $43 billion on the totality of its defense budget. The totality of its defense budget. That's strategic nuclear arsenals, submarines, ships, aircraft, defense industry, and their regular army. $43 billion. From the start of this year until the start of May, basically 4 months, the United States has provided Ukraine either directly or we've allocated $53 billion worth of military assistance. That is $10 billion more than what Russia has spent on its military for an entire year. I'm a Marine, and maybe numbers don't come easy to me, but I'm just saying that if you don't think turning over $53 billion of military assistance has a meaningful impact on the battlefield, then I literally want to know what brand of dope you're smoking, because I want some. It's got to be good. Now, let's parse the numbers out, because I know people say, well, wait a minute, it's old stuff. Hell, I've been saying it's old stuff from day one. I've been saying don't worry about much of this stuff, because you're given a Vietnam era M113, there's not a Ukrainian in their military that knows how to repair that engine. Not one. And we didn't give them enough time to learn how to do that. So we've turned old equipment over with refurbished engines. What happens in combat to engines? They stop working. They break down. And if you don't have the mechanics to repair it, that becomes a death trap. And I've said that. You're condemning Ukrainians to die by sending over this old equipment. We've given them javelin missiles by the thousands, upwards of 8,000 of them. They're not the game winner that people said. It's not one shot, one kill. These are missiles that many of them date back to 1996, 1997, 1998, 1999. They're old. Javelins have a 10-year shelf life unless they've been thoroughly refurbished. But that refurbishment includes replacing the high explosive warhead, which they didn't do. So many of these missiles, even if they guide to the target, they go pop instead of boom. And the Russians don't even blink. A lot of the missiles don't even make it to the target because they release and the electronics haven't been upgraded. So they jam the aileron and the Javelin spins out of control and goes off to who knows where. The same thing with the in-laws. 90%, the number, I got to back that number up. I'll check the number. It's a significant percentage of the in-laws that were sent to Ukraine has exceeded their shelf life. So they have the same problems. And we can go on. Even when we tried the new equipment, the M777 howitzer, you know what? It was made lightweight because they used titanium parts. Problem with titanium, it ain't nearly as flexible or malleable under combat conditions as aluminum. So it tends to crack. And unless you have replacement parts, spare parts, and people trained to maintain the howitzer, ask anybody who's done, any artilleryman who's done a rotation at the National Training Center, what their online ready capability for their howitzers are after 4 weeks at NTC. And they're going to tell you, crap, everything breaks, everything's down. We got to pull it out. If we're not pulling our howitzers out of the line during the rotation, we're going to lose all combat capability. So it's a constant maintenance problem. And you don't train somebody with a train the trainer program, which is what we started with, on how to maintain this. So they get the howitzers, they put them into combat, and they're going to break. Ukrainians can't maintain them. That's an issue. And we can go on and on and on. And so I think I'm on the same page with these people, except when I say $40 billion. Because you know what happens when you have $40 billion worth of equipment? When it breaks, you throw it away and you bring in the next piece. You don't care. Not only that, much of the equipment that they're talking about now is not the old stuff. That was our second phase of arming the Ukrainians. We went from giving them hundreds of millions of dollars of light weapons to saying, oh my God, we've got to up the ante, but we can't be seen as being too provocative to Russians, so we're going to give them old stuff. And we had to do it quickly. So we rushed the training, we gave them the old stuff, and I went, I'm not too worried about that either. Not a big deal. I also believe the Russians would be very good at interdicting this stuff, that when it came in, they had great intelligence, they would find it, they would blow it up before it got to the battlefield. Then a couple things were happening. One, the stuff started appearing on the battlefield in a meaningful way. And when I mean meaningful, it's killing Russians. So all those people that say this would never have an impact, we were wrong. They're killing Russians, not in numbers large enough to change the ultimate outcome, but when you're killing the enemy, you're doing something right. And from the Ukrainian perspective, we're giving them the ability to kill Russians, which means that you're disrupting the Russian flow of action, you're disrupting their operations, and you're forcing them to change what they were doing. So that's going to lengthen the conflict. And the longer this conflict on, we come to the third phase of rearmament, because now we're giving the Ukrainians the good stuff, top of the line stuff. Thanks to Lend-Lease and this money, they can buy brand new equipment, the same stuff the U.S. Army's getting. Fact is, they have priority over the U.S. Army now. So they're getting the brand new stuff, the good stuff, and they're not doing the train-to-trainer stuff anymore. They're going to Germany and Poland and getting 40-day training courses, 60-day training courses. And remember, this isn't a raw recruit we're talking about. We're taking a professional Ukrainian soldier who's already been through basic training, advanced training, and combat, more combat than any American's seen in terms of real combat. And we're taking them and we're giving them 40 days of intensive training on how to use a specific piece of equipment in a war they already understand. So they already are able to envision how they want to use it, what the threats are, et cetera. That's a long time for them to get better. So now we look at this again. I don't believe that changes the outcome on the battlefield because it's too little, too late. It's not going to be enough. But what it's going to do is lengthen this war. So now we come back again, what I said about the special military operation. It ain't war. It was a special military operation conceived at a time when they were dealing with a finite number of Ukrainian forces equipped to a certain standard, receiving a certain amount of military assistance, primarily in the form of light missiles, with an expectation that this was not going to escalate. If you remember, the United States was saying, we're not coming to Ukraine's defense. Jan Stoltenberg, NATO's not coming to their defense. All the hesitation in the various capitals in Europe. We don't want to irritate the Russians by giving them heavy weapons. So there was no expectation that within that Ukraine would still be fighting in 4 months, and B, Lend-Lease, the arsenal of democracy, would be opened up for them, and C, it would be getting $53 billion. There are things happening on the battlefield that maybe the average American and maybe some of the critics aren't observing or acknowledging. The concept that that Ukraine is a no-fly zone for the Ukrainian Air Force, and that Russia dominates the airspace. This is wrong. The Ukrainians are still capable of shooting down Russian aircraft. They do on occasion. The Ukrainians have sophisticated air defense, primarily S-300s, but now they're getting Rapier systems and other systems. They've got Stingers. They've got the British have sent Brimstone. So they've got good air defense capability in place that is getting queued up, which means they have some sort of radar that's picking the Russians up. So it's not a no-fly zone. But maybe people don't understand that the Ukrainians are flying more than 30 sorties, the Ukrainian Air Force, 30 sorties a day from a half a dozen airfields. Now, I don't know what kind of no-fly zone people think's going on there, but when you have the object of the no-fly operating from 6 airfields, flying 30 sorties of Su-24, Su-27, Su-25, MiG-29 aircraft, something's going on. That means that the Ukrainians are still in the game. They're still fighting. They're not winning, but they're still there. They haven't surrendered. They haven't folded. They haven't flipped. Why is this important? Because Russia's phase 2 is about to come to an end. Russia's pretty much liberated the Donbass. They're in the process of closing the final cauldrons. I think today they surrounded around 5,000 guys, 500 people surrendered at one place. They've made important penetrations in others. And the Ukrainian Minister of Defense is begging Zelensky to allow Ukrainian forces to withdraw out of these defenses and regroup into a new line of defense, or else you're going to lose them in numbers greater than what happened at Mariupol. So phase 2 is about to come to a conclusion. What's after phase 2? Because I don't know what anybody else's definition of denazification is, but I think it goes beyond simply capturing 2,439 people at Azovstal and Mariupol. I think it means eliminating the Nazi ideology and the militarized arm of this ideology that exists in the form of Azov Regiment, Adar, and other right-wing groups. They still exist. Azov was formed in Kharkov. It's part of the Kharkov Soccer Club. Kharkov is still in Ukrainian hands. The Kraken Battalion, an elite Azov reconnaissance unit, is still operating. So are other Azov-affiliated units. So if phase 2 comes to an end and we see that the Nazi-affiliated units are still in play on the battlefield, and we see that Zelensky, having banned all political parties except the Nazi-affiliated parties, we have to acknowledge that not only has denazification failed, but that Ukraine is more Nazi today than it was when the conflict started. So military objective of denazification has not been accomplished. 2, demilitarization. I think I've said right up front, Russia's winning the fight in eastern Ukraine. They are killing a battalion's worth of Ukrainian troops a day. They just had 500 people surrender. They've surrounded thousands, and they're in the process of surrounding thousands more. But that's not it, man. Ukraine has pulled back some of their most capable combat units into Western Ukraine, and they're re-equipping them, refitting them, getting them equipped with modern weapons coming in from Europe. Not only that, today we find out that Poland has dispatched 2 battalions of Polish volunteers with modern weaponry, Rapier air defense systems, modern tanks, et cetera. 2 battalions, part of a 15,000 man recruiting effort that the Polish government has undertaken in support of the Zelensky government. Ukrainians have passed a law that allows Polish pilots to suddenly identify themselves as Ukrainians and come in and fly aircraft. So if you think, well, the pilots they got are garbage. So what if they fly 30 sorties a day? These are new pilots, all they're good ones. Oh, these are NATO-trained Polish combat pilots. So demilitarization, what that meant to the Russians was eliminating the NATO infrastructure that had been imposed on the Ukrainian army. For 7 years prior to this conflict, NATO trained the Ukrainian army. So many Ukrainian forces were trained to NATO standards, etc. Demilitarization meant that these units would be either destroyed or demobilized, dismantled. That process is taking place. We see that. But as we speak, Ukraine is rebuilding its army with the assistance of NATO, absorbing NATO combat forces. If that's called getting rid of NATO infrastructure, I need to relearn the English language. There is no demilitarization taking place. Ukraine is remilitarizing thanks to the support provided by NATO and the strategic depth. And this is another thing that people aren't wrapping their minds around. We used to think that all Russia had to do was blow up some warehouses in Western Ukraine and you solved the problem, because NATO said, we don't want to get involved. We don't want to make the Russians think that we're part of it. Well, they are involved now. Poland and Germany have provided strategic depth where thousands of Ukrainian soldiers go without fear of being attacked to be re-equipped and retrained. And then they're fed back into the battlefield. So there is no effective demilitarization. Now we come to the strategic objectives. Is Ukraine neutral? No, Ukraine is more NATO today than they have ever been. Has Russia won such a significant victory that NATO is ready to concede the need to give in to the Russians on their vision of a European security framework? No, the exact opposite. NATO, feeling invigorated by the continued resistance of the Ukrainians, are talking about pushing troops forward. Hell, they're so cocky, Poland sent 2 battalions of troops to fight the Russians on the front line. So now we say, okay, so the Russians are winning the war on the ground. They're about to achieve all of their phase 2 objectives. What I was saying is that ain't enough. That this is a game changer. Things have happened. I'll give you another game changer. When the war started, we were supplying strategic intelligence to the Ukrainians. That is, we would give them big picture, big arrow indications of what the Russian intentions were, etc. Today, we are providing them with real-time tactical intelligence that enables them to sink warships, launch helicopter assaults through the Russian air defense system into Russia, and target Russian generals by name on the battlefield. Real stuff, real intelligence. That's a game changer. Now, when I use the term game changer, I think a lot of people said, well, that means Ukraine's going to win. No, it doesn't. Have you no clue what a game-changing event is? Let's imagine for a second we have the Super Bowl, and Tom Brady was on injured reserve. Greatest of all time, but he's not playing the first half. So they're going to start Scott Ritter. And Scott Ritter may be competent, but he's no all-star quarterback. But you build your whole game plan around taking on Scott Ritter. And Scott Ritter comes out, and at the end of the first half, I get injured, because that's what happened when they put 60-year-old men on the NFL playing field. Tom Brady, on the other hand, has a miraculous recovery and says, I'm ready to come back in. So the second half, they start with Tom Brady. That is a game-changing event. It doesn't mean that that team is going to win. What it does mean that in order not to lose, the other team has to adjust what it's doing to compensate for a new reality. So now let's come to the bottom line here. I'm a professional intelligence officer. My job was to gather information and evaluate information, and then continuously evaluate it, coming up with new assessments that were dictated by the facts on the ground, not by what I believed, wanted, motivated, whatever. Facts on the ground. And any person who has a modicum of understanding of the intelligence business has to acknowledge that the situation that exists in Ukraine from a strategic military perspective has changed significantly than what it was when it started. And if you aren't adjusting your assessments based upon this change, then you're trapped in the past and your assessments aren't worth the paper they're written on. So that's where I'm coming from. I apologize to anybody I offended. My job, I'm not here to offend anybody, but the bottom line is I'm not a lightweight. I don't speak from the hip. Sometimes I get emotional. Sometimes I do knife hands. I'm guilty of that. I don't have any motivations. Nobody's paying me to change my mind. And the other thing that's not happening here is I don't give a damn about viewerships. You know, I'm on your program. You invited me. I'm happy to be here, but I'm not here to get clicks. I'm not here to get viewers. I'm not here to do any of that. I'm here because a guy I like, a guy I respect asked me to come on and discuss this issue, and I'm here to discuss it. But I don't have any motivations of, ooh, I've got to twist this, say this, do this to get more viewers. I don't care. I really don't. I'm glad if this works for you guys. I'm glad it works for anybody whose podcast I go on. I hope they get all the viewers they want. But I don't care. It's not what I live for. So anybody who questions my motivations, now it gets a little personal. And I do take umbrage at that because that questions my professionalism. And, you know, if anything, look, I acknowledge a couple things. One, I'm 60 years old, so my brain ain't what it used to be. Two, I haven't been in the business for a long time, so my skills might be a little rusty. Three, I have absolute incomplete information. Absolute incomplete information. So, you know, garbage in, garbage out. I'm only as good as the data I can get my hands on. But I do have a plan. I do have a system. I do have a program that historically has produced very good results. So I feel competent and confident enough to go public about this. Do you think I'd actually be speaking about this if I wasn't comfortable with my conclusions, if I was guessing, if I was making it up? No, I'd go play golf because that's what I should be doing. And that's what people who don't approach this problem professionally should be doing. You shouldn't be going out there criticizing people who are trying to do, you know, an honest assessment. That doesn't mean that you have to accept what I say at face value. I think I've said this before. I want you to take the opposite approach. Without attacking me personally, I'd like you to view me as a Russian agent whose job is to come on all the podcasts I can and spread Russian disinformation. My job is to lie to you, throw things out there, make it sound convincing. And what I need you to do as the audience is to say, hey, Ritter just challenged us there. Let's double check him. Let's do our due diligence. Let's check his facts. Let's check his analysis. Let's see if it all adds up. And then if you disagree with me, bravo, good. You're thinking for yourself. That I win. That's one of the reasons I do this, is to generate debate, discussion, and dialogue to get people to empower themselves with knowledge and information. And if you disagree with me, that's what freedom of speech is all about. We just had a nice little exchange. But what doesn't work is when I say something and you, without doing any due diligence, any background, you just knee-jerk reaction, say, well, that was different than what he said when it started. Well, guess what? The war is different than what it was when it started. So you're going to get differing analysis. And if this war's still going in 4 weeks, call me up and I bet you have a little bit different spin on it because it's going to change.
You know, it seems obvious to me that that's what you're about, right? That you're here to just give your honest assessment. And in my opinion, we are tremendously fortunate being, you know, stuck with CNN and Fox as our alternative to have people like you and the other analysts that disagree with you and the ones that even question your motives. You know, like, I appreciate all the analysts that bring, you know, thoughtful discussion. But yeah, no, it's frustrating for me. I want everybody to get along and understand we're all on the same side, trying to comprehend truth and understand what's going on. So you you just did a tremendous job of laying it all out there. I definitely can't improve on that. You know, what do you think going forward? I mean, to me, you know, your analysis could very well be cutting edge, and everybody could be looking back on your analysis from a week ago saying you were exactly right, because guess what? Putin went to the Duma and he got some legislation enacted that allowed for him to, you know, increase the draft or something to that effect. You know what I'm saying? So do you think it's likely that is something that could happen from the Russian side in order to deal with the Lend-Lease 2.0 here that, the U.S. is pushing?
When we look at Russia, I'll answer this by going back. If you remember in November, December, January, the U.S. government every day, Russian invasion is imminent, imminent, imminent. Hell, they even gave us days. It's going to start at 4 a.m. on Tuesday.
Right.
It didn't. And I kept saying, no, it's not imminent. Let me tell you how what has to happen before we can even talk about it. Yes, they're building up forces. Yes, they're building up capability. But Russia's a very legally driven society. Putin is not a dictator. He's a president. He has executive powers that are granted to him by the Constitution. But so does the Duma. Oh, that's a rubber stamp institution. Not as much as you think it is. And how about the Russian military? They do anything Putin says. No, they don't. They do anything the commander-in-chief says that's legal. And one of the big things is the legality of deploying Russian troops outside the borders of the Russian Federation. This is a big deal. So in order for Russian troops to go into Ukraine, certain things had to happen. The president had to go to the Duma and present a problem. They gave the Duma said, okay, you now have our permission to deploy troops, but in what context? He had to do that to go into Syria. People think that Putin just picked up the phone and sent the Russian military into Syria. No, he had to go to the Duma. The Duma had to pass legislation, and it gave a very limited deployment capability. And any change in that, the president has to go and get the changes. So there had to be an intervention between the president and the Duma. And then the other thing is, how do you justify this? Russia is a nation that claims, at least, that they adhere to international law, which means that in order to go into Ukraine, they would need an Article 51 authority, unless Ukraine attacked them, and then they have Article 4 defenses. But Article 51 is preemptive self-defense. Ukraine's not threatening to attack Russia. Now we have to get to preemptive collective self-defense. Okay, that one works, but now you need Donetsk and Lugansk to apply to the Duma to recognize their independent status. And then when that happens, it has to go to the president who recognizes it. And now the president can articulate collective self-defense preemptive, because that's preemptive against these two newly declared independent entities. The point I'm trying to make is there's a whole bunch of stuff that had to happen that was knowable and detectable before Russia intervened. Now, it could happen in the course of several days. But to sit there and say that it's an imminent invasion without any of that happening means you don't know anything about Russia. You know nothing about Russia. And I would say 9/10 of the people who comment on Russian affairs today don't know anything about Russia. Now, we come up to the present day. Russia is still constrained by the special military operation. So when phase 2 objectives are met, people say, well, Russia can just go on to Lvov. How? How do you justify going to Lvov if your whole legal premise was preemptive collective self-defense to prevent the Ukrainians from launching an offensive military operation against the Donbass? If you just destroyed the Ukrainian military forces that were going to do that, they're no longer a threat. There is no longer an imminent threat. Therefore, you have no legal justification for continuing this conflict. That's a problem that Russia is going to have to address, because if they simply stop this after the liberation of the Donbass, this is a never-ending conflict, because Ukraine has not surrendered, and they will continue to receive billions of dollars of military assistance and rebuild their military, and this will be a forever problem for Russia. That's what I call a strategic defeat. That's what the United States wants to happen. The United States' objective here is to bleed Russia white, basically to get Russia involved in a forever conflict, a new Vietnam, a new Afghanistan. And if Russia simply says, we're done, we're calling it quits, then they are in a quagmire of their own making. I don't think Russia's stupid enough to do that. I don't think Russia can accept a strategic defeat, which means that there will have to be some sort of intervention by the Russian president to the Duma, seeking broader authorities. And I think Russia was just granted a gift. If it is true that Poland has sent 2 battalions in, if it's true that Poland is in the process of mobilizing 15,000, that changes the dynamic of this conflict. It goes from a simple regional dispute over the security of the Donbass to a broader conflict between a NATO-backed nation and the Russian Federation over Ukraine. And Ukraine's allying itself with Poland in that manner means that I think Putin will eventually declare some sort of general war to exist between Russia and Ukraine, and have it defined in a way that extends into Poland. I think Poland has committed suicide, and also gives authority to deal with the eastward expansion of NATO, which means Russia will have a authorized green light to deal with Finland if necessary, if Finland joins NATO and threatens. And when that happens, you'll see the mobilization of 2.5 million men. And it's a game changer. It's suddenly, NATO's now going to have to deal with a bigger Tom Brady coming on the playing field. So I think that's what's going to happen. I think there's no way Russia can avoid this, because anything less than this is a strategic defeat for Russia, literally a strategic defeat, because they will have not accomplished any of their stated objectives. And even if they try to spin it away, it sounds like Joe Biden declaring victory when the last C-17 took off from Kabul. Really, Joe? That's a victory? Everybody knew what happened. And if Russia stops this fight short, with Zelensky in power, NATO building up a Ukrainian military, Azov battalion still existing, it's not a strategic victory, it's a strategic defeat.
I'm sure anybody watching appreciates that analysis. I haven't heard you say that before. I've tried to keep up on your appearances. I haven't heard you predict that. So I'm happy that I asked the question and you offered that prediction. I mean, yeah, a couple million people, that's quite a sizable force. I mean, what can the West do in response to that? I mean, it doesn't look good, and there's just such a better way of peaceful coexistence. But it seems that the West is just determined to they're going to make their stand now, because their chances aren't going to be any better than they are right now. China's only getting stronger. Russia's only getting stronger. I think the West realizes that now is their time to take their stand. And I mean, where it ends, is anybody's guess. But again, we're all thankful for folks like you with your expertise and analysis to share, with the rest of us some insights that we're definitely not getting on CNN and Fox. I've had you talk for an hour. Is there anything else you want?
Yeah, I think there's an important perspective that has to be brought in, because this conflict wasn't just about the military. If you recall, one of the reasons why NATO and the United States was soft pedaling their support for Ukraine early on was the absolute confidence they had that economic sanctions would weaken Russia, destroy Russia, bring Russia to its knees, that Russia would be unable to sustain the fight because of the economic harm being done to it. That didn't work. The exact opposite has happened. While things are tough in Russia, they're adjusting to the inconvenience of sanctions, because that's what it is. It means that Russians can't use their Western credit cards. It means that Russians can't rent Netflix. It means that Russians can't order from eBay or Amazon. Okay, that's inconvenient, but it ain't a life-changing event. The Russians still have food in the supermarket. They have a ruble that's stronger than it has been at any time in recent history.
Or your high today.
A stock market that is alive and well and kicking. Everybody predicted it would collapse and go away and all that. No, it's there. It's making it's extraordinarily resilient given the amount of sanctions that have been imposed on Russia. So, and Russia is developing its own strategic depth to the east, to China and India, where they are selling gas, and people say, well, they're not selling as much gas. True, they will. They're going to build new pipelines. They don't need to. Want to know why? Because the price of gas has doubled. You only need to sell half as much gas to make as much money as you were making. So, Russia's doing okay. It's not great. No one's going to pretend that Russia right now is in the midst of, the roaring 20s. No, Russia's tightening its belt, and they've got some tough times coming ahead. But what they're not doing is collapsing, unlike Europe, which is on the verge of economic collapse. This is not a good time to be Europe. Many of their businesses are going to shut down, maybe sooner rather than later, depending on what the price of diesel fuel is. People need to understand that European and American economies run on very thin margins of efficiency. What that means is, if I'm Walmart, I don't have a gigantic warehouse with 6 months worth of reserves there. No, the way it works is I order things, they're delivered, they come off the truck onto the shelf, and then hopefully get pushed off the shelf, and we keep that thing going. If there's a disruption in the supply of the deliveries, my shelves go bare. If too many trucks come in and not enough people buying, I have too much stuff. So they've perfected this margin of efficiency. And it depends on the trucker. It depends on those guys that drive those big rigs that burn diesel. And the price of everything we do in the United States hinges on the cost of transportation. And when you suddenly charge a trucker, when he has to pay twice as much for diesel, that means that the cost of transportation is now twice as high, which means either Walmart's going to absorb all that cost, or they're going to go, or they're going to have to transfer the cost to us. The other thing that happens is truckers will just stop driving because they're not making any money. They get paid X amount for delivery. That usually is an all-inclusive price, meaning the truckers will pay for their fuel. But now that their fuel prices has doubled and they're only getting paid the same amount, they're going to go out of business. So a lot of truckers aren't driving. And then we had COVID. But so there was disruptions on there. My point is, as bad as it is in the United States, it's pretty tough right now, and it's going to get worse. Inflation's through the roof. It's going to get worse. It's an order of magnitude worse in Europe. Europe's on the brink of total economic failure. In fact, a European economist has warned the German government that if they're not careful, the damage done to the German economy by the end of this year will be worse than that. Will affect Germany worse than anything since the end of the Second World War. That means since the end of strategic bombing. Okay, so that's what's happening. So, and Russia knows this. And what I'm getting at is a lot of the stuff that we're doing with Ukraine is predicated on an economy that is assumed to be functioning at a certain level of efficiency. But when that economy shuts down and stops working, some of the assumptions people made about supporting Ukraine, and not just the physical act of supporting Ukraine, but the political support for supporting Ukraine. People need to look up James Carville. He's the raging Cajun. He gave some pretty good advice to a guy named Bill Clinton back in the early 1990s when Clinton was running for president. Clinton's one of the smartest guys that ever ran or whoever was president. Doesn't mean you have to like his politics. You just got to recognize, smart guy. He knows it all. He could talk about anything off the cuff. He read everything. And Clinton would get out there and talk about foreign policy and this and that. And the raging Cajun came in and said, it's the economy, stupid. Only talk about the economy because the American voter votes their pocketbook first. And it's the economy, stupid. Every single European government right now that's jumping on the bandwagon to go against Russia is a democratic country. Most of them are parliamentarian in nature. Why that's important? Because if you're like us, we can't just have a vote of no confidence for Congress and shut it down and start over. We got to wait until an election to make changes. But if you're a parliamentary form of government, you get a vote of no confidence, they lose their majority, and it collapses. And the person that is the prime minister is no longer the prime minister. So you have a lot of prime ministers right now in Europe saying some pretty aggressive things about Russia. And the people that put them in office are about to pay a heavy price economically. And we haven't even started talking about what's going to happen when it gets cold. Right now, we're still in the it's getting hot phase of the year, which means their air conditioning isn't going to be running like it was. But then comes the cold time, and that's when things really get bad. Not too many of these governments will survive the winter, I believe, unless something dramatic happens to change this economic problem. And so this is going to alter the strategic picture for Russia as well. And if you're Putin, you have to weigh in the damage that will be caused through general mobilization, which will be significant. It's a big political price, it's a big gamble, and it starts a process that is destructive for all parties involved. It's not as if Russia mobilizes and everything's roses for them. Russia will mobilize and their economy will suffer because now you're taking manpower out of so the industries won't be as efficient. There will be political backlash. And there's going to be war, and war destroys things. So Putin may very well make a decision to slow roll the Ukrainian conflict, meaning that people like me are saying you're suffering strategic defeat. And if he totally called it quits, maybe he would. But he may slow roll phase two to let the economy kick in, to let the economic factor kick in, and then start playing some political cards. I think an important thing for Putin coming up is what's going to happen at the NATO summit at the end of June in Madrid. Is Turkey going to stick to its guns and keep Finland and Sweden out of NATO for the time being? That's a game changer for Russia, because if you don't have to worry about dealing with Finland and Sweden from a military technical standpoint, you have simplified now the military posture equation on how to deal with Poland. So maybe you don't need general mobilization. Now you only need partial mobilization. And so, that, and then the other thing is, what enthusiasm is there going to be in Europe for backing Poland on this really audacious, irresponsible action they've taken? Is Europe really willing to go to war against Russia because Poland has on its own deployed combat troops into Ukraine? Are the Polish people going to want to continue this policy when their economy starts to collapse, when they start to get hungry? And remember, it's not a war of self-defense. It's an elective war. The Polish government elected to go into Ukraine aggressively. So, Russia may not, if you look at it from a military perspective, there seems to be a lot of good reasons for Russia to seek general mobilization sooner rather than later. But when you look at it from a political perspective, a broader perspective, especially when you factor in this economic reality, it may make sense for someone like Putin, who is not a gambler, who is not a risk taker, who is not someone who actively seeks out conflict, to slow this thing down and wait and see how certain things develop. And this is going to be frustrating for a lot of people, because I think there's people that expect victory to be declared soon, that this is going to be over. And I'm saying that it's not going to be over. And then there would be people who, buy into my, who look at it for me and say, well, then if it's not over, has Russia achieved a strategic defeat? They have, if that's their end game. But if Putin is going to slow roll this thing out and stretch phase two out now for another several months, say through August, September timeframe, then it's just a longer fight than they expected. But Russia will have to make adjustments, because how are they going to deal with the new Ukrainian military? How are they going to deal with Lend-Lease? How are they going to deal with the Polish mobilization? These are these are questions we don't have answers to right now. And until we know what the answers are, these are unresolved issues that any intelligence professional would sit there and say, I need to know more about this before I can make an absolute conclusion about other things happening. So there's a lot of unknowns out there that are still being collected on.
Well, Scott, tremendous analysis. That is precisely why I asked you to talk about this with me. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else you wanna? I don't want to rush you off. Like if you have more to say, I am glad to sit here and listen. I learned so much, listening to you. So, but it's been a little bit over an hour. So, anything else that has entered your mind that you wanna get out there?
Well, unless you're a frontline combat soldier, stop taking this personally. I mean, we're all a bunch of people looking at this long distance, and not too many of us have relatives in the fight, so it's not like this is a deeply personal thing. We can have strongly held opinions or whatever, but just respect the fact that everybody's trying to accomplish the same mission, which is to find a fact-based understanding of a very complex problem that you're not going to get from the mainstream media. I think we're all here because the mainstream media has failed us. They aren't doing their job of doing what we're trying to accomplish here. And so we're on the same page. We can have different approaches. We can have different points of view, but it doesn't need to be personal. And you don't have to impugn people's reputations. You don't have to attack people. You don't have to question their motivations. All you have to do is say we're all human and we're entitled to a different point of a different opinion, a different interpretation. There's that old the child's game. You remember the one where you whisper, you get a group of people around and
Yeah.
you whisper something, and by the time it gets back to you, it's totally different.
Yeah.
Now, if I take the approach that some people have taken, I would have to accuse some of those people in that circle of lying, because
Right.
clearly that's not what he said when it started, but it changed to different. None of those people lied. They just acted on what they believe they heard, what they believe. So we all are prisoners of our own biases, our own backgrounds, etc. And that's a strength because it allows us to approach a problem from a different perspective. And if somebody comes up with a different conclusion than you, that doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't make them, a Russian bot or,
Right.
a CIA stooge or, a CNN wannabe. It just means they have a different conclusion than you, which is okay. Because if we're here, either we're here as a self-licking ice cream cone, which means I'm speaking to please myself, or I'm here because I believe that it's important to put data out there to empower people to come up with their own conclusions. And if that's the case, the more data they have access to, the better off. So it's good that there's different points of view out there. It's good that the audience is challenged by a plethora of differing opinions, because then it forces them to do their own due diligence, to do their own assessment and decide which point of view they believe has been more strongly sustained in the process. And this is all a good thing. This shouldn't be a poisonous experience. This should be a liberating experience. And that's all I'm going to leave you with is, man, stop taking it personally, stop attacking people, and just start, doing a better job of assessing data.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's an honor to have you on. And the contribution you make to the discourse is literally invaluable. So I appreciate your comments. I'm sorry I didn't give you the last word. I'm going to hit stop recording now.